Hello, Vanderbilt. My name is Charles Jacob Sugg III, but you can just call me Bud Sugg. I'm from Franklin, Tennessee, and this is my second semester at Vanderbilt and my second semester in the program Next Steps. I really love it. It's taught me a lot of new skills, and this is budacast, one of my new skills. Welcome to budacast episode 8. I am joined here by legendary voice of Vanderbilt athletics, Joe Fisher. Hello, Joe.
It's good to be with you, bud. How are you?
I'm doing well myself. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I was born in Nashville. I've lived here my whole life, and I went to Antioch High School, went to Middle Tennessee State, took broadcast journalism at Middle Tennessee State, and then worked in television here for quite some time as a sports anchor at Channel 4 and at Channel 2, and then got the opportunity to come here to Vanderbilt 15 years ago. So this is my 15th year of doing play-by-play here.
Wow, you've done it for quite a while.
Quite a while, yes.
When did you realize that sports broadcasting was the job that you actually wanted?
Actually, I realized it pretty early. When I was in junior high, I was always passionate about sports, and I was a decent athlete, but I wasn't a great athlete. And so I didn't think that I was going to be good enough to play at a collegiate level or even a professional level, but I wanted to find a way to be close to it. And coaching didn't really appeal to me, but I had always grown up listening to John Ward at Tennessee and listening to Atlanta Braves games here with Milo Hamilton and Ernie Johnson, and listening to Jack Buck in St. Louis and Kaywood Ledford and all those, and Paul Eels, who was the voice of Vanderbilt back in the 70s. And so I thought that would be a way for me to stay connected. So I started really in high school trying to tailor ways for me to prepare myself to get into the business. So I knew for a long time.
That's quite a list of influences.
Yes.
Those are Hall of Famers.
Yes, they are. Yeah, they are. And I was privileged to know many of them, to work with Paul Eels, as a matter of fact. When I started in television, I was a senior in high school. And just working with Paul at Channel 4 was a great blessing for me. And then to get to know John Ward as I did and Kaywood Ledford in his years at Kentucky, and to be influenced by those guys, but then to be a contemporary for them in some ways is a pretty special thing.
What did you have to go through to be a radio broadcaster?
Well, I was fortunate when I went to Middle Tennessee. They have a very active program that gets students involved pretty quickly. They had the radio stations on campus, so you could get involved in production or on air or whatever. And then it really comes down to just how much time you want to put in and how much practice you want to put in. I was sports director at the station at MTSU for a couple of years, and we did 3 daily sportscasts. We did special projects. We produced documentaries, and then we did play-by-play in color on football, men's basketball, women's basketball, and baseball. So we had a lot of opportunities to practice and to get better. So that was a very important thing, because this is one of those businesses where you may have a natural ability, but you have to enhance it. You have to practice it. You have to learn what works and what doesn't. And so that was a real important time.
What does it take in your mind to be a great radio broadcaster?
Well, I've been lucky to know a few of them. I think, especially now doing what I do, play-by-play, to be able to tell a story and describe what you see sounds easy, but it's really not. To be able to just engage yourself in the moment and paint a picture for somebody is a pretty challenging thing to do. So you've got to be a good storyteller. You've got to be very good at preparation to where what you're doing is second nature. You can't think about what you're seeing because you don't have time to do that. You won't be able to tell the story if you're having to wait and pause and think about everything that you're describing. You've just got to be able to do it. And so you've got to be really good at preparation. You've got to have a really good memory. You've got to have all those kind of things. And then the ability to paint the picture for whatever the nuances are of the day. I think one of the greatest compliments I ever get, and you get them from time to time, is from people who are vision impaired and who listen to a broadcast and say, man, I really appreciate listening to you because I can see what you're describing. I mean, that's to me, is the ultimate compliment for what you do.
What is something about broadcasting that the general public may not know?
It takes a lot of time. I remember when I was in television, a lot of people thought I had the best job in the world because you work about 3 minutes a day, because you go and you sit down and you do the TV broadcast. Well, that doesn't take into consideration the hours of time prior to that to put together that 3 minutes, whether it's writing, reading, editing, whatever that may be. What I do is the same thing. The time on the air is kind of the bonus time. Sitting down and doing play-by-play on a game is kind of the icing on the cake. The time consumed is preparation, learning lineups, learning notes, learning stats, all the learning plays, going to practice, all those things you put in to pick up the nuances for what you might see in a game. So I think what people may not realize is how much time it takes to invest to put on a broadcast.
I'm pretty sure you have to wake up early in the morning.
Oh yeah.
Well,
the other thing is it's a very fluid. Some mornings you're up early because you got to do something early. Some are late games. Some you involve travel where you get back at 2 or 3 in the morning. If you're a person that's married to an 8 to 5 schedule, this is not a job you need. That's not the way this job works. You have to be flexible to be able to do things, to put in long hours, to be willing to travel, to be willing to work weekends. We play games on weekends. So if you're somebody looking for the banker's hours job, this is not the job you want.
Outside of Vanderbilt, what is your favorite stadium to go to in football, basketball, and baseball?
Yeah, it's because I'm lucky to go to a lot of good ones in the conference, and they're all in their own way pretty entertaining. I love going to Tuscaloosa for football. The stadium there has really become a pretty special place, and they do a really good job of, the game day experience. It is a lot of fun. Georgia has always been a favorite for me. Sanford Stadium is always a neat place to go for a football game. A lot of tradition there, and it's 85,000 people. It's a neat place. Basketball wise, I may be a little bit prejudiced, but Memorial Gym's hard to beat in terms of the big game atmosphere. When a Kentucky or somebody rolls in here to play, it's a pretty special place to go. But in conference, in basketball, of course, Rupp Arena is a different animal altogether because it's 23,000 seats and it's always full and it's always loud. Arkansas is a great place to go for basketball. They're always it's a beautiful arena. They have a lot of tradition, and it's always an up-tempo kind of exciting place to go. So those are some pretty nice places. Gainesville is a very difficult place to play. It's not a big place. It's about 12,000 people, but it's like they sit right on top of you, and it can be very intimidating for some people. So those are great. Baseball, we've got some really neat venues, some new ones now. Arkansas is a beautiful field. It seats about 11,000 people, and it's always very, very. South Carolina has just built a new place. LSU has just built a new place. So there are some really wonderful places to go to games here in the conference.
In all the stadiums that you've been to, basketball, football, and baseball, what is the loudest you've ever been to?
Well, let's see. LSU at night for football is pretty loud. Tiger Stadium gets pretty rowdy.
They call it death match.
Yeah, and there's a reason for that. It gets pretty rowdy. A lot of their fans have had the whole day to prepare for the game, if you will. So they're in really good voice by the time kickoff rolls around. So that's a very loud place. Alabama's a very loud place for football now. The combination of the number of people and the quality of their product, they have a lot of pride in it, so they turn out in droves for that. Basketball wise, again, I've been a lot of places, but I don't think I've ever done a game in the conference in a building louder than ours. I can remember some of those games when Florida was number one, when Kentucky was number one. Some of those big games that rolled in here, and that place just vibrated. And the way it's built, the old cinder blocks and all that, it's a very, very loud venue. I can't think of one louder in the conference than that.
Tennessee went over there at one point when they were number one too.
That's right. Yep. Yeah, we had a run for a while. Number one teams would come to Memorial Gym and get beat. We kind of had beaten 6 of the last 9 that had come to our building, so we've had some success against number ones.
How many miles do you have to go to or travel?
It's I've not even calculated and probably don't want to. When you think about it, in football, I will travel 5, maybe 6 times a year. We're going to Texas A&M this year for the first time in football. I'm looking forward to that, to go to College Station. It's supposed to be a tremendous football day atmosphere, so I'm really looking forward to that. But you go to Gainesville, you go to Fayetteville, Arkansas, you go to Baton Rouge, so you cover a lot of ground. Basketball, you cover more because you go, 9 times in conference play. You're going to travel, and then you're probably going to travel a couple of times in non-conference, and you might go to Hawaii or Puerto Rico or Mexico or wherever you might go play some of these, Alaska for some of these, non-conference preseason tournaments. And then baseball will travel 5 times in conference play, not counting the SEC tournament, not counting the NCAA tournament. So I probably travel, I'd say probably 25 times a year, I would say that I'll be going.
That's a lot.
It is a lot, yeah. And the good news is, though, when it's coming. You have a schedule so you can kind of plan ahead. I know I'm going to be gone this weekend. I know I'm going to be gone. When I was in the television business, you never really quite knew. It was kind of based on what happened. You might be going home one day and they say, oh, this has happened. You got to go to Florida. And for the most part, our travel is pretty well documented. You know when it's coming in advance.
Over the years, technology has really evolved to a point to where it makes certain jobs easier, like radio broadcasting. In your honest opinion, what has been the biggest change within radio broadcasting?
Well, technology has changed a lot in the simple, the quality and the ability to do it on a much more immediate scale, much easier. With the ability now to as you well know, to have an iPhone that has some capabilities on its own, you can almost do a radio broadcast from your iPhone wherever you might be. So I think there's some accessibility to places that there wasn't before. The other thing that's changed in sports, and it's changed across the gamut of news and public affairs and politics and everything, is there are so many avenues now of network, cable, Facebook, all the social medias, all those things. There are so many avenues now of almost a 24-hour news cycle, sports cycle too, that we're almost inundated with it. And what I think you find now is you find a lot of people in radio broadcasting and other broadcasting who are coming up with things to cover because they got to fill time. Not really whether or not it's relevant or means anything, but I got to fill 2 hours, so we're going to talk about this. So that's one element that I think has kind of gotten a little bit out of hand. I think you still have some quality people out there doing some quality things, but a lot of it now is just, I've got to fill time and I got to fill airtime.
As a broadcaster, what is the greatest sports moment you ever witnessed?
Wow. I was thinking about that earlier. Because I guess they're all relative, and what have you been a part of? Like, for example, individually, Shane Foster's senior night performance here was about as good an individual performance as I've ever seen, where he made 9 straight 3-point shots in the second half in overtime, and we didn't take the lead until he made the 9th one with 3 seconds left in the overtime to win the game. It was literally a guy just throwing a team on his back and refusing to lose, and he was spectacular. So, he scored 42 points in the game, and we won over Mississippi State. So individually, they don't get a whole lot better than that. Team-wise, to see the beginning of the building of a program and be there for a significant moment was pretty special. When Tim Corbin had come to Vanderbilt, and we had not been in the SEC baseball tournament for a long time, it came down to the final game of the regular season, and we had to win. Florida had to lose. In their particular game, Florida lost. We were playing Tennessee. We were behind by a run in the bottom of the ninth inning. And Worth Scott, who's from Hendersonville, Tennessee, just up the road here, who was like a 200 hitter and not a special player any means, hit a 2-run homer in the bottom of the ninth to win the game and send us to the tournament. And that sort of was the birth of the new tradition now in Vanderbilt baseball. That was probably about as special and emotional a moment as I've seen. Of course, beating Tennessee in 2005, in football for the first time in 20-something years when Jay Cutler hit, Earl Bennett with a touchdown pass to give us the win. Those were pretty special. So I guess the good news is it's a pretty long list across 15 years. I've had a pretty good list of things that I've had an opportunity to see.
Well, the longer you get, the more special moments.
Well, you hope so. You hope so. And we've it's been a really, I think in many ways, kind of a golden age for us, to have football teams that now go to bowl games, to have basketball teams that go to the NCAA tournament on a pretty regular basis, to have a baseball team that's been to the College World Series, that's now recognized as one of the elite programs in the country, to have a women's basketball team that's been 14 straight years to the tournament. I mean, the expectation level now for our programs is that kind of success.
Who's your all-time favorite athlete and why?
Oh, boy. I don't want to mention a Vanderbilt athlete because I would leave somebody out. And it's funny because I remember when my son was growing up, my son's 22 years old, just graduated from Alabama. We would watch athletes and try to pattern them after. I want you to be kind of like this kind of guy. And so a guy like a Barry Sanders at running back at Detroit, and not only with his talent, but the way he played the game, the respect he had for the game. He was not a showboat. He was just a guy that did his job, admired everybody else, appreciated everybody else's help. That kind of guy is the guy that I looked at. Joe Montana was that kind of guy. Baseball-wise, Hank Aaron was the guy that was in his heyday when I was growing up. To see him, I remember being camped out in front of the television, watching him hit number 715, and remembering that moment as the historic kind of moment that it was. So I was kind of geared not just to guys who were great players or great athletes, but people that I thought were great people. And so those were the kinds of people I gravitated toward, had a great chance to meet and talk to and interview, and so that was pretty special.
Any basketball athletes that you might like a lot?
Well, Magic Johnson was a pretty special guy. Had an opportunity to meet him and talk to him a little bit, and he was one of those guys that just had a tremendous personality, engaging. You enjoyed talking to him, and he was, he kind of changed the game. When he came along, here's a 6'9" point guard. He was a pretty special guy, and then
could play any position
and play any position, and played center at a time when Jabbar had his problems, and they moved him to center, and they still went on and won a championship. So he was a pretty neat guy to get to know too.
Obviously, there are some people who are still trying to pursue a profession that would suit their particular skills. What advice would you give to any person that's pursuing a radio broadcasting career? Like me, because I want to be a radio broadcaster one day too.
Well, you have to be willing to do a couple of things. One is you've got to be able to put in the time. There are a lot of people in a lot of professions that feel like they can go to college, take my classes, get my degree, and then walk out and say, "Okay, I've got my degree. Give me a job." Radio is not one of those. Radio is one of those where people will say, well, I appreciate the fact you've been to college and you've got a degree, but have you got any experience? Have you been on the air? Have you been behind a microphone? Are you a good writer? Have you done those kind of things? So you've got to be willing to put in the time to do those other things that you're going to need to be successful. You've also probably got to be willing to work wherever the job is, whenever the job is. I know a lot of people that I've talked to in the past that say, "Well, I'd like to get in the business, but I don't want to leave town. I want to stay here." Well, you really minimize your opportunity for success if you're going to limit yourself to that kind of thing. Like for me, I thought, and sometimes when I get, you think about it, there are probably in the United States, at the level that I'm working at right now, if you count pro broadcasters, there's probably 500 that do what I do when you talk about Division I college and professional. That's how many jobs there are. So it's not an easy market, to break into if you want to do something like that. So that's why you have to be willing to work the long hours, to work in a small town, to work your way up the ladder, because very few people become overnight successes in this business.
What are some funny stories that you may have had within broadcasting?
Oh, gosh. I remember the first game I ever did at Vanderbilt. First football game that I ever did, we played in Starkville against Mississippi State. We were not good at that time. We were winning 1 and 2 games a year, and they were good. Jackie Sherrill was their coach, and it was a hot Saturday afternoon game. I think the first 2 passes we threw in the game were intercepted and returned for touchdowns. We lost, I think 42-0 was the final score, and I don't think it was really that close of a game as how bad it was. And I remember getting on the plane to fly back with the team after my first game and saying, what have I gotten myself into? Because this is miserable. I mean, this is going to be a long, long year. And one of our players who was sitting in the seat in front of me turned around and looked at me, and he said, hey, so how'd your first broadcast go? And I just kind of laughed. I said, did you just see this game that we just played? How do you think it went? And he was like, well, your first broadcast, was it fun? Did you enjoy it? And it just struck me as these guys got it quicker than I did, that there was, winning and losing is a big deal, but there were other elements involved. And this guy took the time to think about my first game and how special it must have been for me to do it. And that to me was a pretty special event. I learned a lot about Vanderbilt players at that point. The weirdest road trip I ever had, I was doing a women's basketball game. We played in Starkville. It's funny, Mississippi State's involved in this one too. On a Friday night, we lost, and we were a much better team than them when we played. We played terribly, and an ice storm hit in Mississippi and Alabama, and we were supposed to bus from Starkville to Birmingham and catch a plane and fly to North Carolina for a Sunday afternoon nationally televised game against North Carolina State. Well, we bused to Tuscaloosa, which is about an hour's drive. Took us about 3 hours. And they said, okay, we got to stop and spend the night. The roads are bad. We got up the next morning to drive from Tuscaloosa to Birmingham, which is about an hour's drive. It took 6 hours on this bus because of the weather. And then at one point, our bus slid off the interstate. They had to send out the National Guard to come and get us because they came out in their Humvees. They came out and got us and took us to a hotel. They found us a hotel. We stayed in a hotel. And then we're trying to figure out how we're going to get to North Carolina because we're supposed to play on ABC on Sunday afternoon. And so we get up on Sunday morning. The airport's closed. But they convince, we have a charter plane coming in. They convince the people at the airport to cut one trench in the runway to peel the ice for the front wheel of the plane. That's all. They just make room for the front wheel of the plane. So we walk on solid ice to get on the plane. The team hasn't practiced in 2 days. We lost on Friday night. We're getting ready to go play NC State, who's ranked, I think, 14th in the country. So this is all not looking like a really good trip. So we get on this plane. We fly. We land an hour before game time in Charlotte. We're going to play at Charlotte Coliseum. We walk in. They've got spaghetti for the girls because, they got to eat something for a pregame meal. So they all snarf down some spaghetti to get some pasta, get some energy. We go on the court without practicing at all for 2 days after having played terribly on Friday and beat NC State by 25. And it's like at that point I said, that you never really know. That's one thing you'll learn. You never really know what's going to happen.
Well, that's all with the questions. Thank you for taking the time to do it.
Good to be with you.
Is there any questions that you might have for me?
How long you been doing this?
This is my 8th radio podcast, so
good.
This is my first year of actually doing this.
Well, good. Well, I appreciate the invitation to be on.
Well, it's an honor to speak with you.
Thank you.
This is Bud Sugg. Thank you for listening. Tune in next week for a new version of budacast. Thank you.